Hi guys, welcome back to another video. So we are going to be working in my sketchbook today, but it's going to be for a very brief session. So initially, I was not going to show the footage for this video because I wasn't sure if I was going to actually end up finishing this project. So in the past, I've shown you guys that I've worked with air dry clay every so often for like little mini projects of like making chibi figurines. I also have this gigantic little mooncake box holder thing that stored my current air dry clay projects that I was going to finish, but I lost the motivation after, I don't know, I just find air dry clay very messy to work with. So we'll return to these maybe in the future, but today I wanted to work on a different project. So let's crack open to a new page and start to sketch out what I want this project to kind of look like. We're gonna do these very loose and very simple just because it's just a very loose guide for myself. So I still want to do some kind of clay project, except for I'm not using air dry clay today. So to start off, I wanted to do a chibi that is sitting. Now, these are kind of like inspired by these little chibi figurines that I've seen of especially like Haikyuu characters, but I've seen ones for Chainsaw Man and Jujutsu Kaisen as well, I'm pretty sure. At least, am I getting, I don't know. It's either Kageyama from Haikyuu, or it's like Aki from Chainsaw Man, or it's Fushiguro from Jujutsu. I'm pretty sure all of them probably have this figurine at some point that I've seen. So it's basically them kind of like sitting on the floor with their knees up, and the character's kind of looking upwards at you with their hands on their knees, and it's just super cute looking. So I wanted to make a Freminet version. So in that little mooncake box that I showed at the very beginning, I had a Freminet version already kind of, at least for the most part, the body was kind of already fleshed out to that similar pose. But because I find air dry clay so finicky, it's a little bit harder to work with if you're slow like me and you're kind of fighting against the work time of the drying, I guess, like from the air. But I enjoyed working with it, and I feel like I got fairly comfortable with air dry clay. But this time I wanted to work with something that gives me a little bit more room to either add more detail or to take a lot longer on this project than I kind of like anticipated to. So I'm not too sure if you remember the Natsume video that I did probably back in maybe April or the end of March maybe? I'm not too sure when I filmed it, but this footage and the rest of the footage for probably today's video is going to be very, very sporadic, as I was not planning on potentially finishing this project, or if I ended up finishing it, I didn't want to maybe upload it. So the footage from the sketching portion and probably this initial session where I'm cleaning my mat and we're going to set up with all of our stuff. So let me explain this first. So I have a little sheet of, I think it's like an acrylic sheet. I also have my clay, which is polymer clay. I'll make sure to link or list the materials in the description if you're interested. And then I have these Meeden clay tools, which I initially bought to mix inks as well as mix my liquid watercolors. So to start off, let's go ahead and use some tin foil to kind of plan out the proportions of our chibi. So I'm going to roll one into a ball and the other one into a gumdrop-ish shape for his body. So this is just to make my overall project a little bit lighter, and it gives my project a little bit more structure before we start off. So while I'm doing that and kind of prepping for the rest of the little base of our chibi, I started this project, like I said, in April, and I was like super gung-ho with wanting to work on this project. But later on, as I did more research, because I should have probably stated this at the beginning, I am no expert at working with clay, nor do I claim to be an expert, nor do I know that much about working with polymer clay. The fact that I stopped working on this project only because I got scared of like using our home oven to bake these projects. And it might sound silly to some people because people do it all the time. It's just that I kept getting mixed kind of responses of what I was searching up, whether or not it's safe to use the same oven you cook your food in with something like polymer clay, but the packaging does say that all fumes, that if it does emit any fumes, are non-toxic, so it should be okay. And I've also read that as long as you don't burn your project, you should be okay, and nothing like anything that's like remotely horrible smelling or anything like that should be emitting from your clay. And yeah, it shouldn't be really dangerous for the most part, as long as you follow the instruction on the box. So yeah, I'll talk about that once we get to kind of the firing process for the Chibi figurine. So I'm rolling out the clay so that I can get kind of a thin surface to overlay on top of our bases. So I got the face with kind of a thin layer, and then I added more for the nose and the chin area so that it has a little bit more dimension. And then I did something similar for the body where I covered it entirely in clay. But I am going to work on these two pieces separately. So similar to my air dry clay session, I treated the body and the head as two different pieces. So I can kind of like not worry about bumping into one another if I need to add more detail or if I need to take stuff away. I'm not accidentally kind of like bruising the other one to fix another, if that makes sense. So for the body, I'm going to include pretty much everything else. So it's going to include his legs and his arms. I'm going to try my best to do all of his clothing and everything before we bake. And kind of the reason why I'm saying before we bake is that I am aware that there are people, and it might be even more recommended to bake in steps for some projects that are a little bit on the larger side, which I don't know if this is considered larger. I think he's like the size of my fist when he's sitting down, so he's not like super, super big. But some people prefer to do baking in steps so that you let some kind of like previous steps bake and get harder, kind of like as a way to save your progress in a way, so that you don't accidentally bump into it, you don't dent or break or anything like that, and you kind of can build on top of your already baked kind of structure. But the problem is that I've also did more digging into like research on potentially baking in steps, and some people said that if you bake in steps, some unbaked clay might not want to adhere to already baked clay, which I did not have anything that's like bake and bond, so I didn't really want to risk it. So I ended up just trying my best to form both of the portions all at once so that we can bake it all at once. So for the most part, I did not find my old clay tools that I used to use back in university because I took one clay course, or not clay course, I took Sculpture 101 or something like that, like 201 or something. And I have so many stories about that class, but I'm not going to get into it. I'm sure I talked about it in the past anyways. But we are skipping to 2 months later, which is like, I think around June 12th, maybe-ish. So I decided to do some of these pieces and portions off screen because, like I said, I was not sure I was going to record the entire thing, nor did I think that I was going to actually keep this video available. I was just going to scrap the footage at some point. But I have majority of his body already kind of fixed up and made for the most part, and I found my other clay tools, so I found it a little bit easier for me to use these to smooth out some areas and to adhere some of the pieces back onto Freminet. So the last things that I'm going to be showing you guys while I'm still doing the kind of sculpting portion is that I'm fixing up his hair. I am also going to be adding his hat. So there are some details that I ended up omitting because I was just getting super impatient. So I am definitely a person who prefers to work with 2D art for the most part. I like drawing, I like painting, I like using markers, I like using ink, watercolors, all that stuff, pencils, charcoal, anything 2D is fine on me. Usually, you know, something on paper, something on canvas, we're good. But anything 3D, I struggle with a heck of a lot. So I learned that I sucked at doing a lot of 3D stuff when I was in the sculpting class. So I found it a little bit intimidating working with either I guess like both of them, the air dry clay and the polymer clay. But I was trying my best to make sure that, you know, it's gonna somewhat resemble Freminet to some degree. but just some parts I had to omit because I was losing my patience so quickly. So even for like Freminet's hat, I didn't want to make the actual proper, I guess, like volume and shape for his hat. So I put a little ball or blob on the middle of his head, added the brim of the hat, and added a kind of thick disc that I ended up just squishing over to kind of feel like a filler hat. I tried to fill in the gaps so that it doesn't look like just a disc on top of his head with a gap in between. So hopefully it reads correctly. I don't think it's too bad as like a first attempt using polymer clay. Now, unfortunately, I did not show the baking process. This is a picture from before baking. I buffed out some of the areas before we ended up baking. I also ended up tenting my clay projects in the oven because I was afraid of burning and causing like any bad smells and stuff via the house and like in the oven and stuff. So I decided to tent it to prevent anything from burning. After that, and I let the kind of like clay cool until it's like literally no heat on the clay at all. I ended up sanding with I think a lower grit. So about, I think it's anywhere between 400 to 600 grit. And then after that, if I wanted to smooth out some of my rough areas that I initially sanded, I will go up in grit. So I will use something like, I think anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 grit to kind of smooth everything out. But because I'm impatient, I went from baking to sanding to painting all in one day. I ended up kind of doing two versions of how I wanted to paint. I do not own any paint primers. I also don't know where my gesso is currently. So I wanted to try two different methods of trying to get coverage on the clay painting portion. So one is painting Freminet with a similar color to both his skin tone and his hair color, which I made it a lot lighter just because I want to be able to build up value slowly. But on his body and on his cap, I ended up painting a light gray because I have an abundancy of this kind of color. I thought maybe I could make it act as some kind of like base coat so that the acrylic has an easier time to adhere. Now, I was wrong. I probably shouldn't have done this layer, especially for some of the lighter areas on Freminet, such as his hands, as well as the white portions of his clothes. It kind of required a lot more coats of acrylic paint just because now the gray is showing through, which would have made it a little bit easier if it was just the kind of beige color, like kind of showing through. Now, I don't think I will in the future because I probably won't be sculpting too much other than maybe this Chibi and one other one because I want to redo the one I was going to make for my friend. So, yeah, okay, let me finish this thought first. So yeah, I probably won't buy like extra clay in the future, but if I do, I will definitely buy the white version. It's just easier for me to layer up colors that are darker than my initial base because I found it a lot easier for me to paint, let's say, his skin tone and the rest of his hair and stuff once I had kind of that weird light peach color-ish tone on top of the rest of him. So definitely thinking about getting white clay if I do end up buying more, but I still have plenty of that beige clay, so I'll probably just continue using that for a little longer. And yeah, I'm not too sure if I'm going to do so much like clay sculpting anyways, so we'll see. But in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see that there's like a weird banana and a white ghost looking clay friends in the corner. So basically, I was going to treat them as like little test subjects. So I was going to use them to kind of test out different steps. So I did bake them before I baked Freminet's two pieces, just to test whether or not I was going to bake at a correct temperature. Obviously, Freminet and his body was going to require a longer baking session. So I believe all of them baked at 250 Fahrenheit, I believe, for, let's see, the smaller ones, probably for an hour, I think. And then the larger ones, so Freminet and his body, I baked for 2 hours. So yeah, at least to my knowledge, they're fully baked and they don't feel flimsy or fragile or like brittle or anything. There's still a little bit of give and bend. So hopefully it's baked correctly. But I wanted to use the test subjects as well for testing acrylic paint adhesion, sanding, and the varnish that we're going to add after we're finished painting Freminet. But also, I was going to use these as like little gifts for a few friends. So hopefully, I don't think they're watching this video. But one of them is a Yaminion. So they're a fan of Shu Yamino. So I wanted to make the little Yaminion kind of little keychain for her. And then the other one that looks like a ghost or like the white little characters is the Verbongi or Vernon's Bonbongi for a friend. So moving along, I was having a little bit of an issue with, as usual, drawing the face on these chibis. So in previous sessions, I've never really liked how I did the face, but I will always take a picture of my clay project and draw on top what I think the face will kind of look like. Now, unfortunately, because I take a photo of a 3D object, it does flatten the image, which means that once I actually paint the same kind of like design or like proportions on my figure, it's not going to look exactly the same because it is a 3D object and depth is also a thing. So I tried my best to use a water-based marker to outline where I thought his eyes, his eyebrows, and his mouth would be. And if I messed up, I can just wash it away with some water. But I think his face actually turned out pretty cute. I definitely think I just dislike my proportioning for his face. I think the kind of like chin to nose area should be more flattened or like pushed in towards the face a little bit more, because it reads almost muzzle-ish because it sticks out so much. But I think that's it for the painting session. So I probably waited like a total of 15 minutes after finished painting Freminet to do the varnish or the glaze. So I believe the clay glaze that I currently have is for air dried clay, but I bought this one because it's supposed to have more of a like matte finish versus my glossy varnish that I've used on previous projects. So the reason why I don't like the gloss as much, I might actually add a little bit of gloss like here and there on Freminet a little later if I want him to have a little bit of sparkle or sheen to when the light hits him. But from at least what I noticed, this varnish is not like 100% matte. I'm not too sure if it's like just supposed to be a protective coating and it's supposed to take whatever was the previous kind of texture or surface of the project before it was varnished, but it kind of just has the similar sheen that acrylic paint just has overall, which personally I'm not too bothered by. It's definitely a lot less shiny compared to the gloss varnish that I've used for previous projects, so I'm quite happy with it regardless. And it kind of helps with just hiding a little bit of my paint strokes here and there on Freminet. But now I'm adhering with some Gorilla Glue or Super Glue his head to the rest of his body. So even though I initially planned him to look like this, there is a weird gap between his hands, and I forgot to paint where his knees and his hands kind of like touch. So because of that, it just looks like skin there, which looks kind of weird. So after I finish like gluing on the rest of his parts, which is just like this little, I don't know, chain for his hat, and I'm using a toothpick to kind of clean up the glue just because I don't want too much excess everywhere, I am going to do something a little bit unplanned. So before we get to working with a solution to fix that little awkward area, let's take kind of like a little spin around or like a little turnaround of Freminet right here. I think he looks super cute. Like I mentioned, I feel like his chin to nose mouth-ish area sticks out a little bit too much. You can kind of see some areas where I botched up painting as well. But for the most part, I think I like Freminet the most out of all my little chibi figures. Figures? I don't know why I said it like that. But I'll show you all my clay projects at the very, very end so that if you guys want to see a comparison, it'll be easier to see it then. But we still have a few more steps to go through before we get there. So let's go ahead and fix up this little weird awkward spot. I don't know if I wanted his hands to touch or I thought his head would be kind of like lower. There is like a little bit of glue where it's creating a gap between his head and his hands. But I decided to like impromptu kind of give him my toothpick that I was using to fix up the super glue and snipped off both ends so that it no longer had a point and stuck it in between his hands. And now it kind of looks like a fishing rod. So after that, I decided to take I guess like piece of plastic portion, whatever this is called, off of like a clothing tag. so that I could kind of mimic fishing line for him. So I was kind of lucky that we still had a piece of clothing that still had a tag on it, and I did ask that whether or not I could just like, you know, rip this off so I could use it for Freminet. So I decided to snip off both ends to kind of make it a clean little piece so we don't have that weird flat end. And I decided to make a really weird lumpy makeshift kind of fish for Freminet. So it would have been smart for me to actually keep that little flat piece of the plastic and make the fish like cover the entirety of that little flat piece so that it can adhere more, I don't know, sturdier. I had a hard time kind of figure out how I wanted to adhere the fish to his fishing line. So initially I was going to use like actual fishing line, but I couldn't find it. I used to use it back in uni for a different project, but I guess that's for another day. So this is like the first little chibi version that I've made with air dry clay. You can see some areas that probably cracked and chipped. So I chipped his hair, I chipped his ahoge at some point. I also gave him a little teacup, and he's done with some gloss varnish. So he's kind of really shiny at the moment. After that, I made some small versions of a brisk cadet and a stargazer at the time, because I was trying to find like small, easy mascots to make. I also have a pentomo. I might make a phantomo at some point. We'll see. But after that, the last one I made with air dry clay is my little chibi of Maseki. So he has like little ball hands. He's very short and stubby, and I don't know, he just looks concerned. And I gave him the similar dot eyes that I did to Freminet rather than like the chibi eyes that I gave to Zhongli. So yeah, but you can see his head has fallen off a few times, so I've had to re-adhere the super glue. But kind of like in comparison, this is what Freminet looks like, and kind of like the size comparison with the rest of the figurines that I've made out of clay. But you can kind of see that he's a little less shiny compared to the rest of the boys, alongside with the little mascot figurines as well. But yeah, I think the fishing pole idea was a good idea for Freminet, just because I think it suits him, but it also kind of gets rid of that weird gap that I had between his hands. So yeah. But yeah, you can kind of see the difference between the gloss and the matte varnish. I definitely like the matte varnish a little bit more, so probably future projects I will continue to use that one over the gloss ones. But last but not least, a very small kind of comparison between him and the little sketch version, which he's kind of similar-ish in size, and you can see that I omitted giving him pair alongside with his bag on his back. But I think that's it for Freminet. One last little go around of the entirety of seeing what he looks like when he's fully adhered. But yeah, hopefully I won't drop him and he won't break, but maybe in the future I'll do more clay projects where I'll actually have the intention to finish. But I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!